Okay, I want you all to think back with me to your younger school days, maybe around 5th or 6th grade. Raise your hand if you liked school back then. Oh my goodness, that's so much fewer than I expected. Raise your hand if you liked recess and PE about school. Yeah, okay, I would be in that group. I loved having recess and PE. I liked school even until middle school because my classes weren't hard, but I especially loved recess and PE. I was tearing it up on the playground. Can a couple of you just call out like which games you liked at recess and PE? Just Foursquare. Kickball, dodgeball. Okay, yeah, those were all great. I personally loved capture the flag. I mean, that was like my battleground. I was tearing it up. But even playing capture the flag was not enough to make me willing to risk my life to go to school. I mean, having a runny nose, that would make me stay home. But that was not the case for Malala Yousafzai, a young girl living in Pakistan in the early 2000s. Malala took a bullet to the head for trying to go to school in 2012 simply because she was a girl. And I don't know about you, but I was never that dedicated to my education. Malala later received the Nobel Peace Prize for her advocacy efforts, and her acceptance speech is the one that I will cover today. I'd first like to give you some background information on why this speech was necessary, and then I will take you through what methods Malala used to be an effective speaker. Malala was a young girl during the height of the Taliban's reign in the Middle East, specifically Pakistan. According to the Council for Foreign Relations, the Taliban is an extremist terrorist group that rose to power in the Middle East during the 1990s by staging coups and overthrowing the government of city after city. They existed previously to the 90s, but that's really when they rose to power. The Taliban used the religion of Islam as a justification for their extremism, but practicing Muslims do not actually align themselves with many of the Taliban's extreme methods, which include, but are not limited to, public executions, floggings, harassment of women specifically, restriction of entertainment use, and prohibition of women's education. They claimed that their interpretation of Islamic law, or the Sharia law, allowed and required these measures to be taken in order to keep their people in line. And the Washington Institute states that the Taliban based their political platform on the desire for peace and a, quote, defense of Islamic character. However, neither of these things were fulfilled when they actually gained power. Malala Yousafzai grew up in a Taliban-controlled Pakistan, but she really saw them tighten their grip during her adolescence. The Nobel Peace Prize website states that while the Taliban forced women and girls to stay home from school, Malala wrote anonymous blogs about what was happening. According to Britannica, she gave public speeches and appeared on national television in resistance to the Taliban, which was relatively unheard of at the time, and she was only 13 years old when she started doing this. She gained extreme popularity worldwide and eventually won the National Youth Peace Prize. But this fame was not safe for her. Shortly after this recognition, a Taliban gunman shot Malala in an assassination attempt as she was riding the bus home from school. After many surgeries and a long recovery stage, she did recover and continued to advocate for women's rights and education. On December 10th, 2014, Malala Yousafzai became the youngest person and the first Pakistani to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. She accepted this award in Oslo, Norway, and gave a speech highlighting her efforts in ending the oppression she had experienced firsthand and other human rights issues that she had worked with and experienced worldwide. This speech was important because unless you are living through either what she lived through or the other issues she talked about, you may not ever know much about what the Taliban was doing in the Middle East. For those of us from America, a country that prioritizes individual freedoms, most of us can't even imagine something like limited education. In fact, if you were like me as a child, you maybe wished for limited education because we had to go to school. But Malala effectively used ethos and pathos to inform her audience and to move them to action. She used ethos by alluding to her own story of her fight for freedom, which makes her an expert on the topic. A speech on this issue from, say, an older American man wouldn't mean nearly as much because he has no way to relate to what he's talking about. He has no experience with that issue. But Malala was the best possible person to speak on this topic. Additionally, Malala made use of pathos, the appeal to her audience's emotions. She recounted numerous other stories of girls from other countries experiencing the same types of oppression in other countries. And she said, "I am those 66 million girls deprived of education." By saying this, she not only gave her audience a concrete number of how many girls were experiencing this, and that number has actually increased dramatically since the time, but she effectively aligned herself with the marginalized group. And finally, she finished her speech with a very clear call to action. She didn't just move her audience to strong emotions and then give them nowhere to put those emotions. She said, "We ask the world leaders to unite and make education their top priority." Malala called out the world leaders for putting their own children in excellent schools that taught literature, algebra, and fine arts, while being satisfied with letting other people's children go to schools that could only teach them the bare minimum. Malala called her audience to hold leaders accountable for the conflicts that were happening worldwide, and she asked that everyone prioritize peace and education over war and slavery. She said, "Why are we so quick to pick up guns and so slow to pick up books?" And Malala purposely used a lot of we language. She didn't just attack her audience and go after the people she believed were responsible for the conflicts she was addressing. She used we language to unite her audience and bring them together against a common enemy. Her audience already knew that she was actively fighting the injustice of the Taliban's actions. The Malala Fund website states that she donated all of her Nobel Peace Prize money to building schools in Pakistan, but she wanted to bring her audience with her in those endeavors. One of her closing statements was, "Let us become the first generation that decides to be the last that sees empty classrooms, lost childhoods, and wasted potentials." This encourages her listeners to be inspired about the change that they could see happen in the world if they joined Malala and her cause. In conclusion, we've seen the importance of using your personal experience to inform any speech you give in order to build ethos with your audience. We've seen how Malala used pathos to connect with her listeners emotionally by telling other stories from around the world, both about the restrictions on women's education and slavery worldwide. And most importantly, we've seen how a 17-year-old used her incredible platform to advocate for those who had no voice of their own. She selflessly persisted in being a champion of human rights, and specifically women's rights, and called others to do the same.